Number two, I just wanted to throw out some numbers with regard to the loss of productivity in Cayman due to congestion. And we got these numbers from our traffic model recently. In 2018, the total vehicle hours of delay was estimated at 4.8 million hours. And when we put a cost factor to that, that equates to a cost of $135 million in loss of productivity in 1 year. Fast forward to 2026, if we don't make road improvements and we kind of keep things as is, we end up with 9.9 million hours of lost productivity, or $282 million per year of lost productivity. Moving forward to 2036, again with a no-bill situation, we end up with approximately 18.6 million hours of lost productivity, or $540 million per year. So that's, when you look at it from that perspective, that's the cost of congestion to local residents. And the last thing I want to say is focus on some of the benefits that we perceive with the East-West Arterial. So the East-West Arterial is a vital part of the proposed improvements that you've seen that we've been making. And in keeping with the National Conservation Act, the project is set to undergo a detailed environmental impact assessment, which will look into environmental and social challenges, as well as technical feasibility of the planned route. So the process, as demonstrated by the draft terms of reference, which is available to the public, as you all know, is to involve technical studies, geotechnical analysis, hydrology and hydraulics, route mapping, aerial surveys, traffic modeling and forecasting, environmental and social impact analysis, and stakeholder consultations, beginning tonight with our presentation of the draft terms of reference. So this is an important project for us and for the government as a whole, and we are taking it seriously. And so in short, and in closing, what are some of the benefits of the East-West Arterial? Well, one is it will support long-term economic growth. It will improve the road travel reliability. It will facilitate modern, safe, and efficient public transportation. And it will do that by providing necessary dedicated or shared bus lanes, bus laybys, bus stop facilities, and the like. If we were to try to implement public transport on the existing network, it would be very difficult to put those necessary facilities in place. And the road also will support improved access to the eastern districts and improve connectivity to the residential neighborhoods east of Savannah Newlands. And we also say that it will provide a safer road alternative to the existing coastal roadways, and it will provide a robust climate resilient road alternative in general. So before I turn it back over to Jay, I just want to say that he will explain more about the process and why we're here today and the role of the consultants. So thank you, Jay.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Howard. Actually, I'm pretty much going to throw it back to the panel, because I'm going to let them introduce themselves and let them introduce themselves to you, and then they'll begin the presentation, just in the essence of time, because we have so many people and we want to get to your questions. Please.
Good evening. I'm Denis Thibault. I'm the Assistant Director of National Roads Authority. For this, and I'll do a very, very quick overview of East-West Arterial, which was initially conceived and gazetted back in May 2005, pursuant to Section 26 of the Roads Law, which is essentially a long-term projection of road corridors, equivalent to a development plan. There's been many attempts to start construction or government to secure funding for that. In October 2021, the NR formally requested a scoping opinion for the proposed road corridor from the Environmental Assessment Board. The scoping opinion was issued by the EAB in November 2021. The scoping opinion outlined the likely significant effects of the East-West Arterial Extension project, which would need to be assessed under the Environmental Impact Assessment Framework. Following a competitive tender invitation in March 2022, the firm Whitman, Walker and Associates was awarded the contract to carry out the EIA in August 2022. The draft terms of reference that we'll be presenting tonight, we're coming to you for consultation, right? To have your input on what we're proposing. The draft terms of reference provides details of the studies and assessment which the NI and WI are proposing to be carried out for the identified indirect, direct, and cumulative effects on the natural and developed environment. The draft terms of reference will identify measures that will avoid, minimize, and/or mitigate identified effects on the primary objective of the EIA. So, along with me this evening, our part of WI or Whitman Records and Associate is Lindsay Ulizio. She's a senior project engineer. Kimberly Glinken, she's a senior environmental planner and noise analysis. Dodie Frawley, senior project environmental scientist. And for T.Y. Lin, we have Sarah Goodkunst. My apology if I missed that. She's a senior environmental scientist. T.Y. Lin was retained to assist the NRA in oversight project of the EIA, but they also have extensive experience with wetland protection and retention. Yep. Okay, so the East-West Arterial is what that we're discussing under the EIA. It is made up of two sections. Section 1 currently is under construction from Hearst to Woodland Drive. Section 2 would be from Woodland Drive to Lookout, which is approximately 3 miles in length. And the third section would be from Lookout Garden to Frank Sound Road. It would terminate in the vicinity where the J Scott Plaza is located currently on Frank Sound Road. It's about 10 miles, and we've identified, again, the EIA will determine what will be the final width and alignment of the corridor. As Edward indicated, the main purpose of the proposed corridor is to provide disaster resilient transportation network to connect the eastern and western districts, create the central alternative road to Bordentown Road, which is a coastal road, and ease traffic congestion along Bordentown and Shamrock Road. As Edward has indicated, also the needs is to address the effect of climatic events and sea level rises along the coastal road. Deal with the lack of alternatives to Bordentown and Shamrock Road connecting eastern and western district, and address frequency and the severity of congestion along Bordentown and Shamrock. Yep. Okay, so as I said, this is a public consultation. You're being consulted on what we will look at in the study. During the study, there will be public participation where you will be asked to participate in some of the aspects of the study. So this is only, we're trying to get your feedback and see if we address the scoping opinion, if there are other aspects of the project you would like us to look at. And once this is approved, we'll solicit your comment. You'll have until February the 20th to forward the comments to Department of Environment. There's a comment cards all around, and also it's available on the website for NRA and DOE. And the terms of reference, as it already indicated, it'll look at several applicable resources: socioeconomic consideration, the hydrology and drainage, geo-environmental, terrestrial ecology, cultural and natural heritage trust protected areas, greenhouse emission, and noise and vibration. And on that note, I'll pass the mic to.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to discuss the highway design and traffic analysis engineering portion. So here on the left-hand side, you can see from a helicopter view during the morning rush hour traveling westbound from the east end towards the central and western districts. This is Shamrock and Town Road, and you can see that the congestion and queues back past Hearst Road and continues on. This was from October of 2019. So with existing traffic plus anticipated population growth, you can imagine with the limited options what the travel conditions will be for the future. So I'm just going to reiterate the focus of the roadway analysis. It would provide a disaster resilient alternative route, as well as if you have an incident on the primary arterial of Shamrock and Town Road, you would have an alternative route for emergency services and to get from point A to point B safely and efficiently. It would meet the existing and the projected multimodal travel needs through improved traffic conditions, while also preserving the unique environment of Grand Cayman. It would also provide an improved and enriched quality of life through improved mobility and accessibility for residents and visitors alike. So the alternatives evaluation, this is the start of it. And as you can see, we have 3 primary alternatives, but I would like to caveat that these alternatives then also include subsections and, let's say, refinements to these alternatives to ensure things such as roadway alignment, elevation, access points, to ensure that we are looking at the optimal solutions to meet your purpose and need, and what are the concerns and the needs that need to be addressed with this project. So as you can see, the first option, the alternative, is a do-nothing alternative, which essentially you have the committed projects that we will work with the NRA, and then you have the east-west arterial section, the first section between Hearst and Agricola Drive. The second alternative, primary alternative we would look at is the expansion alternative with sections 2 and 3 that includes all of the do-nothing alternative as well as this extension of this roadway. The third primary alternative would be to include all the committed projects in the do-nothing alternative, but also improve and do any necessary design, safety, and/or operational improvements needed to meet the purpose and need along Shamrock Road and Town Road. So we're going to hone in on the alternatives evaluation of step 3. So looking and comparing all the different alternatives that we're going to look at. So some performance metrics and some comparable performances that we can look at, for example, different components. You have sustainability measures. So you have the cost effectiveness of the particular alternative, both short and long term for the life cycle costs. You also have the environmental and the natural resource conservation. To what level will these alternatives keep the water quality, air quality, and how they will be conserved, protected, and enhanced? Also, the ease of implementation based on NRA contractual and policy procedures on the existing operating procedure or conditions and circumstances. You also have the community context, where the level of which promotes and maintains your local and your regional community, or you're driving all the public, the multimodal aspect of things. You want to move all goods and people safely and efficiently while improving the quality of life and the accessibility. So other performance metrics, very tangible performance metrics that all of you in this room can relate to, and I know I've talked to quite a few of you. Travel time, the reliability to get from point A to point B safely and efficiently. I have heard several folks talk about taking an hour and a half to 2 hours in the morning rush hour to get to your destination. Also for key destinations and outlying tourist attractions to help improve that, as well as the reliability, and to determine what the measure of severity would be during the recurring traffic that you experience day in and day out. Also your queues. You have, as you saw in the previous photos from the helicopter ride, the extensive queues and the queuing that you're sitting there. So your diminished quality of life as your kids are sitting in the car in their PJs sleeping, and then you have to not only get them dressed and have them eat in the car so you can get to your destination in a timely manner. Also fuel consumption, emissions, and land use accessibility to once again improve the quality of life and the connectivity to safely and efficiently reach jobs, healthcare, grocery stores, etc. So with this process, we have a bunch of alternatives. We have the primary alternatives with the subsections that we're going to look at all of different metrics, and we're going to boil them down and look at possible factors for the screening process to see what the optimal solutions would shake out of this. Such screening factors would include the ability to minimize the removal of unsuitable materials, to reduce the aggregate volume need to construct the new road, address areas that have a need for multimodal, pedestrian crossings, wildlife passage, and to reduce direct and indirect impacts to your protected areas. So with that, we would come up with a matrix. As you can see, the summary of anticipated impacts, you have different alternatives that would compare to the no build or do nothing conditions, which will be detailed and quantitative to show impacts such as your socioeconomic, your hydrology, your cultural and natural heritage, green gas, noise, and traffic. And we will take all of these into consideration for a benefit cost analysis, so we can see the biggest bang for the buck, that we're addressing your purpose, the needs, as well as what is most cost effective and the optimal solution that would check most of these boxes for you. Here you see a typical section example, and I do want to caveat that I know that you see this is a 3-lane section. It's very wide. I know that may be startling to some folks, but I just want to caveat that this is just an example of what you would see in the documentation of how the roadway would be laid out. This is not necessarily saying that this is the end-all be-all, but NRA does methodically, come up with and really think through the process of developing the infrastructure that is going to be needed for future projected anticipated volume. So rather than being reactive, we're looking to be proactive to ensure that we have the appropriate infrastructure to safely and efficiently move goods and people in all different modes of transportation. So another example here, you will see that here are different examples of the roundabout configuration. So you start off potentially with an unsignalized T intersection at Hurst Road here and the EWA. You then have different considerations such as a bow tie shaped roundabout. And here in this third graphic, you can see that this is a 2x1, which means you have 2 lanes coming in and then circulating. You may have 1 lane in the circulation, but it's not just to focus on the vehicles going through this intersection. It's also to focus and show what we can do with that from a multimodal accessibility standpoint. You can see that we have pedestrian and cyclist crossings as well as bus pull-offs. So it's not just serving the vehicles, but it is serving all modes of transportation. And this is what we will work through in detail with the intersection level and the access points along the corridor. So the traffic analysis portion that we will look at, it feeds into the highway design. So we're looking at a system perspective to determine the optimal solutions to meet the purpose and need of this project. We're looking at a holistic perspective of project mobility, impacts, and benefits to be determined and evaluated for each alternative. The alternatives we'll be looking at will be evaluated for years 2026, 2036, and 2046. And the most recent census data will be used for each district to forecast the future year volumes, because we want to ensure we are building an adequate facility, the infrastructure needed to be able to accommodate the future anticipated growth. So as we evaluate these 3 primary alternatives, the necessary refinements could be determining the number of lanes at the roundabout, as you had seen in the previous graphic, the number of lanes circulating as well as entering and exiting a roundabout per se. The turn bay lengths at the intersection that are needed to store the vehicles, number of through lanes, and intersections configurations at each intersection to be able to accommodate the multimodal accessibility. As you can see here, this is our overall multimodal transportation model flow. So we start off with your socioeconomic data, your roadway data, and your land use applications. So we get all of the data for Grand Cayman, and we have it into NRA's travel demand model. So with this, we can analyze our future year alternative evaluations that we had just discussed, the primary alternatives with refinements for those 3 horizon years. So if you're looking at just the travel demand model, which is a higher level vision, you can use and you can evaluate these alternatives, and you can look at screening metrics, turning volumes, travel times, fuel usage, emissions, to compare these alternatives, objectively compare them, and then another good aspect of this tool set is a customized automated summary maps. So you can see what is happening for each alternative, and you can then be able to quantitatively and qualitatively compare them. Refined traffic operations analysis then stems from the travel demand model, where we get into more detail and we can still analyze the future year alternatives, but we can hone in on the more detail of the multimodal aspect, and we can come up with detailed metrics such as your intersection operations, how much delay you're going to have at an intersection, and the queue lengths, as well as turning volumes as well. So there are multiple quantitative metrics that will be able to compare these different alternatives as part of the benefit cost analysis to determine the optimal solutions that meet the purpose and need. And with that, I will turn it over to Kim to talk about study area and socioeconomics.
Hello. Hi. Okay, so now that Lindsay has figured out what alternatives we're going to be studying, the next question is, what's the area that we're going to look at, the larger size, to evaluate environmental, social impacts? Let me move forward. The direct impacts are shown on with the green and the purple line on the map. That's where the footprint of the alignment is currently sketched out to be. So what we look at, wetland impacts, things that are really focused on just the footprint, that would be their study area. Many other topic areas such as noise, socioeconomics, they go a little further. Noise is typically, we'll get to that later, but it's much further. It's a distance, a buffer around those purple and green lines. Each resource will have their own defined direct impact study area. The next item to look at, though, is the indirect effect and the cumulative effect. So what could happen as a result of this project occurring? We've had a lot of discussion about the mangroves, the central mangrove area that all needs to be included. So we have a larger study area that goes about half a mile to the east and half a mile to the west of the direct impacts, the green and purple lines. And then we go to both coasts. So we do want to include the whole area in this section of the island. Let me talk about indirect and cumulative impacts specifically. Indirect are impacts that are reasonably foreseeable that could happen as a result of our project. They could occur later in time or at a distance from the project. Then we have cumulative impacts, which take into account projects that have occurred in the past, all the developments that have occurred. We understand what impacts those have already had, especially to the wetlands and the mangroves. Then we also looked at planned future developments and what we could expect to happen, or make our best guess of what could happen. So we try to take all of that into account. So we're not just looking at this roadway project as its own, but we need to understand everything associated with it. One topic of indirect impact is induced growth. And that is the specific development that could occur that we would once again do a best guess. It typically occurs within 1 mile, where we would focus our assessment, within 1 mile of any new interchange, roundabout. It makes that area easier to access. It also makes that area, if we do put this roadway in, those within 1 mile of the new roundabouts would have better travel time to their jobs further west. So that's the area that we focus on as far as induced growth. What we would do for induced growth is subtract the areas that are already protected, such as NCA lands, and then we would use the land use and zoning that is currently in place and make our best guess of what could be developed. We will then include that information into our traffic analysis impacts, into our estimation of the indirect effects that could occur to wetlands. So we are trying to understand everything that could come with this project. Now, all of the resources would be studied for both direct, indirect, and cumulative effects. These are on the chart, different varieties of how we would try to quantify and qualitatively discuss the types of impacts that we could have. Are they certain impacts, or are they potential? Such as the developments, that would all be potential. We don't know what could come. Are they permanent, or are they temporary? Temporary impacts that just could occur during construction of the roadway, lay down areas. We'll look at all of that as well. And then positive and negative. We want to focus on both the positive and negative So we understand everything associated with this project. Once we have the impacts identified, we would then qualitatively discuss whether what their importance or sensitivity is, how sensitive perhaps the mangroves are to the impact. So we would take into effect whether it's a high sensitivity or if it's something that's really not that big a deal for impacting something, something simple, a parking lot, something that we could fix quickly by just making some minor changes. We'd also discuss the magnitude. Is it a really high impact or negligible impact? So we do some sort of chart to try to understand and allow you to understand what type of effects we're talking about. Now, socioeconomics in specific, we're going to look at both objective and subjective characteristics to try to describe the area and understand what has happened in the past, how the area has grown, how population, employment, and then how it's projected to grow. We're going to look at residents, renters, businesses, and also marginalized and vulnerable groups. People we want to make sure have the same benefits as others. We don't want somebody to be slighted just due to their economic or financial issues. For the socioeconomics, we're looking at the entire island for the study area because it does, so many of you are traveling from the east end all the way to the west side. We want to make sure that, employment's going to affect the whole island. Population growth will affect the whole island. As far as the process, I probably went through some of that already. We're first going to identify the baseline of current conditions. We'll review relevant planning documents, data, zoning laws, you name it, anything we can find. If you have suggested plans or reports, that you think would be critical to what we're doing and you're not sure if we're looking at them, please let us know. We're then going to talk to developers and the people, the NRA and planning, and try to identify what the plan developments are in the area. And are there any plan changes to any laws? We'll try to include all of that. We'll then assess the potential benefits and impacts of the project as compared to the no build. And we'll describe it qualitatively as far as what your quality of life may be, how that may change as compared to no build, access, mobility, income and economics, and changes to housing. We'll then share this information with the relevant agencies and just try to identify measures to minimize any harm that this could happen. Next, I'd like to talk about noise, vibration, and greenhouse gas emissions. So put on a different hat right now. Noise is a specific environmental impact that really affects those who are nearby, either the existing roadway for construction impacts or the new roadway for when it's in operation. The distance that is typically used, we're doing a combination of UK standards and US standards since Cayman does not have their own standards. So what we've come up with is about 2,000 feet from the new roadway, which is a half a mile. So it really is a far distance for noise. But we'll look at that corridor for operation. And then construction is more focused because it's more focused on construction trucks using the existing roadway and what additional noise that may have. So that's about 165 feet from the roadway there. Oops, there's the map. In order to do the first step for noise, we would do noise monitoring to evaluate existing conditions. We currently propose to put 2 meters out, a sound level meter, just like putting a cell phone on a tripod, and we would leave it in somebody's safe backyard for a full day to get hourly measurements. And then we would also do about 7 short-term noise monitoring sessions where we would take that short-term, that same meter, and we would be along either the existing roadway or near the proposed roadway, or areas that would butt up against where the proposed roadway would be, just to get the background noise. We would then use that information to develop a 3D model. It takes into consideration XYZ. So it gives you elevation and distance. We input information such as where the noise sensitive receptors are, where the houses are, where your recreation facilities are. And then we also put in buildings that would deflect the noise. So we kind of create this model of what you can see when you're out there. And then we add traffic and speed, and we can get estimated sound levels for both existing conditions and future conditions. So we could do this. We plan to do that on up to 3 alternatives, which would include the build alternative and if we have something along the existing roadway. So we can study all of that. What I would like to put out there is if anybody would like to volunteer for noise monitoring at their house, please feel free to write it on the comment card or approach one of us, because we do need a safe location to keep our monitors, especially the 24 hours. And we do need your consent to go on your property. So any help we could have, it would be to your benefit to have a good model. And what we can do with these models too is if we find that we've got some room to shift the roadways north-south, we could see where our sensitive receptors are, and that if we shifted a little bit one way or the other, we could actually minimize effects to a certain community. So that's why these models are really good. Next up is vibration. So vibration is only focused on construction. Operation, there is no really vibration issue during operation of the roadway. But during construction, it's mostly for perception, for annoyance. So what we would do is a qualitative assessment, what type of construction vehicles were anticipated being used, what type of construction activity, if we need pile, different activities, and then how far away the construction is from receptors that would be sensitive to noise, vibration, I'm sorry. But that's all a qualitative assessment. And then once again, we can we can identify where there may be issues adjacent to sensitive receptors and identify measures to minimize any of this annoyance. And finally, I have greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas analysis will include an analysis of tailpipe emissions, as well as the effect that the peat removal will have on the carbon sequestration losses, and then what the road material will have on the emissions. Once we look at that, we'll come up with, identify some potential mitigation measures. It may be to identify that construction vehicles need to reduce their idling, or that we need to put special equipment on the construction vehicles, or we can choose materials that may need to be, that can be better reused. Or we can revise the road design so we can minimize how much peat is being removed. With this, I'll take it over to Dodie.
Okay, I'm going to talk about hydrology, drainage, and geoenvironmental. So on Grand Cayman, hydrology and drainage are influenced by various factors listed there, such as topography, geology, climate, tropical storms and hurricanes, freshwater lenses, and the large mangrove population. The flat and low-lying topography is vulnerable to winds and flooding that's caused by hurricanes and tropical storms. Flooding on the island can vary. It is limited in areas that have sufficient elevation and porous limestone outcropping due to the high amount of infiltration. And then there's frequent flooding in both developed and undeveloped areas that have low elevation and or like peat or soil that has low permeability, such as like the cap rock. Within the project area, the hydraulic function is largely determined by the flow of rainwater runoff and storm surge flows from south of the mangroves north towards the mangroves. You can see the arrows on the picture over there. And the central mangrove wetlands are very important in the hydrologic cycle. rainfall generation, local water hydrology, groundwater replenishment, water filtration, soil stabilization, and also hurricane protection. So there are the three largest freshwater lenses are the Lower Valley lens, the Northside lens, and the East lens. The Lower Valley lens, the Lower Valley lens you can see at the bottom there, and that's the smallest of the three. And that underlines or is adjacent to section 1 and 2 of the proposed roadway. The Northside lens, which is on the north side there, it's about 0.6 miles north of the east side of section 3. And then the east end lens is on obviously the east side there. And it's about 2.5 miles east of the eastern extent of section 3. These freshwater lenses have 3 different zones. There's the freshwater there, saline, and the brackish, which is in between the two there. They are basically recharged mainly during large rainstorms, and they're an important source of potable water on the island. All right, peat underlies most of the mangrove swamps and also some of the bedrock. There we go. It's mainly composed of the organic remains from the mangroves themselves. And peat is a very important player in global climate change because it does sequester the greenhouse gases. Trial pit data was collected along the proposed roadway alignment back in 2008 for section 2 and section 3. And it did show that peat does underlie a portion of the proposed roadway alignment. Along most of it, it's an insignificant depth, but in areas closer to lookout gardens, it can average about 5 feet. And then I think the deepest we found was 14 feet. So a potential impact is during construction, there might potentially be soil compaction and erosion, temporary dewatering, and also disturbance of the natural resources. To mitigate for these potential impacts, we could do erosion and sediment pollution control. That can include, as you can see, the low impact construction vehicles. There's some matting there. We can properly site the temporary stockpiles and access roads to try to minimize their impact, and also use best practice pollution prevention techniques. And there you can see a silt fence and a filter log there. So another potential impact would be a damming effect caused by the roadway. As we saw earlier on the slide, how the hydrology runs north. So north of the proposed roadway, that could potentially restrict the hydrology to the mangroves. And then south of the roadway, they might actually be, the mangroves and the adjacent populated areas could be inundated. And obviously the roadway there might affect the drainage and the runoff. So, and if there's existing drainage infrastructure, if they are damaged, that might obviously cause further flooding issues. So for mitigation, we could maintain the water flow, and this can be done through, as you can see, an elevated roadway. We can use aggregate in the actual embankments to allow flow to go through, and then there's a box culvert there. So the footprint of the roadway itself may cause a loss of the mangroves and peat and their important environmental functions. Mitigation measures include minimizing disturbance when developing the proposed roadway design, so being careful of the footprint, salvaging and reusing the peat, and elevating the roadway. And there's could potentially be other design options we'll look into. As we discussed before, the stormwater and drainage patterns could be impacted, and in turn could affect the freshwater lenses, the ecology of the natural resources. Contamination from the roadway, either directly, such as spills, or indirectly through surface water runoff, could pollute groundwater, freshwater lenses, or other potential sensitive habitats. So a stormwater management plan, including drainage infrastructure design, will be developed to help reduce and mitigate for these impacts. So various guidance documents will be reviewed to determine applicable standards that will be used. Sources include Cayman Island and UK, and also international standards. And in addition, national departments will be consulted. So various desktop and field assessments will be completed in order to identify potential cumulative impacts and inform the selection of mitigation options. There's a list of assessments there. They include hydrologic and hydraulic analysis, freshwater lens study, flood risk assessment, mangrove peat assessment, cut and fill estimation, an assessment of risk significance, and the impact of sea level rise and climate change. Okay, with that, I am going to pass it off to Sarah.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the terrestrial ecology and cultural and natural heritage sites. Like we've talked about before, we're not only going to look at these sites in terms of direct impacts due to the construction, but also indirect impacts through the operation of the roadway. All right, so some of the sites that have already been identified as environmentally sensitive areas that we'll take a look at for impacts during the EIA are 2 national trust sites, which are the Central Mangrove Wetland and the Mastic Reserve. And then also we have national conservation lands, including the Little Sound Environmental Zone, Meager Bay Pond and Animal Sanctuary, Little Cay at Duck Pond, and portions of the Central Mangrove Wetland. And you can see along sections 2 and 3, they border the southern boundary of the Central Mangrove Wetland and the Mastic Reserve. Along with these areas, we also have ecologically sensitive areas to the north and south of the corridor that are not currently designated as protected areas, but we will be taking a look at those in the analysis as well. So the EIA is going to evaluate the potential functional loss of these areas with the goal of achieving a no net loss of biodiversity. And we'll talk about the methods that we'll try to achieve that. Thanks. Okay, so the Central Mangrove Wetland is a fundamental component of the natural ecosystem of the Cayman Islands. Mangroves make up about 36% of the Grand Cayman's total land area. And the Central Mangrove Wetland is the largest contiguous mangrove wetland in the Caribbean. So it's super important. It's home to numerous plant and animal species. And on top of that, they protect the coastlines by reducing effects of storm surge. They reduce erosion, filter nutrients to the North Sound area, which plays a part of the food web here. And they also store carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So on top of all these things, they also create a great habitat for a lot of the fauna that live on the island, such as those you see on the screen here. The West Indian whistling duck, about 83% of the population is found here on the Cayman Islands. And then you also have a lot of endemic species here. The Grand Cayman parrot and the Cayman Brock parrot are two endemic species that are found on the island, and they rely on black mangroves for nesting habitat. The Meager Bay Pond is a designated animal sanctuary to protect resident and migratory birds. So we also have the Mastic Trail, or the Mastic Reserve and Trail. This is the largest area of dry forest on the Grand Cayman. It's an old growth forest. Historically, it's been above the water nearly 1.9 million times longer than the rest of the island. So this area is where a lot of the native flora and fauna evolved, and it's home to many of the endemic species here. It also historically was used as a passageway to traverse the wetlands. So the Mastic Trail was officially established in 1995 to allow users to experience the natural undisturbed areas of Grand Cayman. Okay, so the methodologies that are going to be used during the EIA process to evaluate these resources are first to establish the baseline conditions, and that's going to be a lot of the data gathering using GIS and field surveys, the hydraulic and hydrological modeling information, review of technical reports to establish what the existing condition is. And then from there, we'll identify potential risk sectors, such as the ones that we've been talking about, and ones that have been identified in the scoping opinion. And from there, we'll do desktop and field review assessment. So going out into the field with GPS and drones to collect data and characterize and map the ecological features in terms of the size, the type, and the functional value. And there's several different ways you can evaluate the functional value. From there, we'll perform a significance and magnitude of change evaluation to establish a degree of effect for each of these resources. And then from there, we can start to think about mitigation measures. And like I said before, the goal is biodiversity, no net loss. So some of the anticipated impacts to the wetlands in the Mastic Reserve, not only direct, but temporary impacts for the construction phase, as well as secondary, indirect, and cumulative impacts for the operation of the extension. So some anticipated impacts include loss of habitat, habitat fragmentation, loss of species through disturbance or wildlife vehicle collisions, restriction of animal migratory movements, construction of roadway runoff, noise, traffic, hydrologic connectivity. So from there, we can start to consider the mitigation measures. Avoidance and minimization will be considered to the greatest extent possible, but if that is not possible, we start to look at mitigation strategies to offset. And there are many, many different ways you can achieve this. Some of these include wildlife crossings, hydrological crossings, replacing the habitat either through creation or restoration of what's already there, enhancement, or preservation of what you already have. And then, of course, we have mangrove restoration that's been very successful in past projects, scraping down areas that have been filled, creating mangrove planter areas, and reestablishment of tidal connections. Okay, so along with the terrestrial, thank you. Along with the terrestrial ecology, there will be a section on cultural and natural heritage sites. These are kind of the same sites that we're talking about in the terrestrial ecology, but the sites are also protected under the National Conservation Act, National Trust Act, and the Public Lands Act. So the identified resources to date are the Central Mangrove Wetland, the Mastic Reserve, and the Mastic Trail. And these resources are archaeological, historical, and architectural sites of interest. So the framework for evaluating the cultural and natural heritage sites is kind of similar to the terrestrial. First step is we'll do an assessment of just gathering information of the potential effect on these sites. Second step is consultation with stakeholders, engaging the DOE, the National Museum, National Archive, the National Trust, any nonprofits, to identify any additional known and potential future heritage resources. From there, we'll develop a scale to establish each resource's intolerance to change based on their importance and status. And then we'll evaluate the impacts, create a degree of effect to be combined with the intolerance, and develop kind of a weighted score for each resource. And then we'll document the impacts, make recommendations for avoidance and minimization, and from there, explore different mitigation measures.
Okay, so how can you leave a public comment for this evening as a result of presentation? You can provide this evening your written comment to NIA and as a pure DOE employee this evening. You can also email to the Environmental Assessment Board, which is at doe@gov.ky. You can also mail your comments to the Department of Environment and hand deliver your comments to the Environmental Center of 580 Northside Road, Georgetown, Grand Cayman. The deadline to receive comments on the terms of reference for this evening is February 20th, 2023. And I'll pass this on to Jay.
Thank you, guys. I think we did pretty well with timing. We just have about an hour for your comments, and we will have roving mics through the crowd here. Again, we ask your questions to be concise and to the point, so we allow everyone to have a chance to get their questions heard. And anybody, just raise your hand and we'll take your questions. We got over here in the corner. You love being first. Coming right behind you with a mic. Hang on one second. We are streaming, so we'd like to record and hear. The people at home can hear this too.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. The first thing that I was thinking during your presentation is, why is it that the public consultation and the opportunity for feedback, the chance for that is coming prior to an environmental impact study as opposed to after that, when the public can be more educated along with the process that you're going to endeavor to do? The way I see it, the opportunity for public input should come after the environmental impact has been completed, not before.
Hi, I'm Joyce Barkley. I'm the project manager for WRA. It's my duty to make sure I've got the best of the best on the panel, which I think I do. So in terms of the public consultation, there's actually going to be 4 opportunities. The first 2 today and on Thursday, that is discuss what your concerns are about this, not just this projected or proposed road, but also about the alternatives. So we want to make sure that as we're putting the terms together, we're addressing all of your concerns. You know, I don't want to get to the end of the assessment and then find out we forgot something that, maybe only you know about or that you're concerned about. So the whole point for us today is explain to you what we're already putting in the terms, and then having you come to us and say, well, you forgot about X, Y, Z, please include that. So we've got the 2 meetings just on the terms, but then once we actually get into the actual assessment, we're going to have more public consultations in addition to everything that's going to happen in between, so that when we get down to the final assessment, we have the reports and we have answers to give back to you, then you can also have consultation at that point in time. So we have the 2 meetings for the terms. We're going to have 2 meetings for the final reports, environmental assessment, and then we're also going to hold public participation in between during the studies as well. But we want to make sure that we capture all of your concerns so that we can get it incorporated into the terms. The terms is what's going to guide us in doing the assessments. It's going to tell us what regulations we have to follow, what standards we need, what are our criteria that we're going to compare all of this information to. So this isn't the only consultation.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Next question. Coming back with a microphone.
Sorry. I was just wondering what the current budget was looking like for the environmental mitigations and whatnot, and if you would consider reaching out to schools, et cetera, for fundraising, as there's a lot of environmental groups that I'm sure would be happy to help.
Great to hear.
As far as establishing a budget really for the mitigation, that's something that will be looked at more in depth during the EIA process. First part of the process is the terms of reference, where we kind of lay out how we're going to do everything and all of the factors that we need to take into account. And then from there, we kind of look at the acreage of impacts, what we were talking about, the functional loss of everything. And of course, that kind of equates to a cost or actual dollar amount once you get far down into the process. So we don't have a number for that yet. I think engaging local groups and local communities is a great idea. You all have a great interest in protecting your environment. So I think that's a great resource to consider as a mitigation measure.
All right, thank you.
Great suggestion. Don't be shy. There we go. We got one in the back and one in front here. So we get, but you both raised your hand to the front. So one of them can work this way, one of them work that way to the back. That way in the back. Right here, the lady in the sunglasses.
Yes, I'm actually worried about the mitigation regarding the hydrology for the north side of the lens. Because it's going to cut off what feeds the greatest lens at the north side. I think it was Dodie who mentioned that. You kind of glossed over what you were planning to do, and you had some ideas. But if you can go back to that graph that actually showed the flow of the water, I think you just passed it. It showed the flow of the water from one end. Yes, right there. Okay, so that part is actually feeding the lens.
Yes. As part of our assessment, we will be doing hydrology and a hydraulic assessment. Those have not been completed yet, but we will be looking at modeling how the freshwater lens will be impacted by the potential, by the roadway.
Are you planning some basins to capture the water? How are you planning to do that, especially at this end? Because the mountain actually is the effect. The clouds go over the mountain with the east wind, and then it carries through to go down further westward. And that's why Georgetown has a lot more rain than the north side has.
Yes, from the evaporation from the mangroves. Yep,
Exactly.
it moves
And then
west.
it all goes that way.
Right. Well, as part of the assessment, we will be identifying potential methods in order for the mitigation. We haven't identified them at this time. At this time, we're going to be looking at a huge range of options. We're open to ideas if you have any thoughts on that. I just have some suggested ones like the elevated roadway, the box culverts, the aggregate to allow the flow to go through.
Several of the roundabouts will be on the mangrove, they'll be skirting the mangrove. If those roundabouts could actually be kept as mini wetlands and landscape to retain that kind of property, then you would have an underway way to have a flow for the water to carry through.
Okay, that's a good comment.
Instead of elevating your roundabout, you could actually basically have it lower, which is a case in the countryside roundabout where you had a natural crater that got covered over, and the church nearby is actually flooding. It could have been used naturally for the church not to flood and use that natural crater to have the water, to receive the water. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, at this stage, we're looking at all potential options. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Noise abatement will you be doing for this proposed highway? For example, where we live in Georgetown North, we have West Bay Road on one side, low density neighborhoods, and then you have the wetland swamp, and then the Easterly Tibbetts bypass. When it was just a 2-lane road, it was very quiet in the neighborhood. The gardens, your sanctuary was always very quiet. Now there's a 4-lane bypass and there was no noise abatement put. So when you go in your gardens now in any of these neighborhoods, it's very noisy constantly from Monday till Friday or Saturday. And there is no abatement at all. So it's really stressful for people living in these areas when you're downwind of a busy highway. So what abatement will be put for the noise?
The first type of abatement we look at is actually where the location of the roadway would be to try to shift it away from residential areas. The greater the distance, the less noise that you will hear. Other items that we could look at are noise berms. Sometimes you could put walls or fences up between the roadway and the residences. So we could look at a variety of abatement measures like that.
My question was, do you have any proposed? Because none was put when NRA built the road, the East of the Tibbetts bypass. Nothing was done. So it is
Sure.
stressful still for people living there with the noise, with jack brakes and dump trucks, cars.
I can fully understand what you're saying, yes. The good thing about doing this assessment is that we are proposing to look at noise, so we will go out there and measure the noise that it is now. We'll look at what it's going to be. We have UK standards that we will look at this against and work with the NRA at figuring out how we can reduce sound levels, especially where they're highest and especially where we have new neighborhoods that don't currently have any noise and now they're going to be adjacent to a roadway. So we're going to look at all of that.
I think it's important to realize that this is the very first public meeting where they're looking at what you think should also be added to the environmental impact assessment. They haven't done the environmental impact assessment yet. They're still working on the formula of how they're going to do it. So this is the time to say, hey, you should be thinking about this, you should be thinking about that. And then they're going to come back to you guys and say, this is how we're going to fix the noise abatement. So the first step is what should they be looking at in the first step? Sorry to interrupt, I really do. Please.
Hi, someone mentioned that our wetland is the largest contiguous wetland in the Caribbean. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my question then is, on your initial assessment so far, in your professional opinions, should we be tampering with it at all? Is it important enough to just be fully left alone? That's a question you guys need to answer in your environmental assessment.
Well, honestly, It's not really a yes or no question for us as the assessment team. It's for us to go in, assess all the possible impacts, whether negative or beneficial, and provide the information back to the public. You decide yes or no, should we impact it? So,
Thank you. I got more questions, more than you can handle tonight.
Oh, go ahead. Wendy, go ahead. After, okay. No problem.
Oh, it's me. Hi. Kind of going on the wetland assessment part of it. One of the things that I'm concerned about is the mangrove wetland is obviously very tightly interconnected with the ecosystems of the North Sound and then the reef beyond that. Why is there not being any marine ecological assessment included in the impact assessment? Because obviously if there is negative impact to the mangrove wetlands, that is going to have an effect on the North Sound, on the reef, which has tons of cultural and economic importance to the country. So I just think that should be probably included in the overall assessment, the impact, potential marine impacts.
we do agree with that assessment. It also depends on where we think the proposed road is going to go, how far away from the actual shoreline it's going to be, and whether the impacts that we have by the proposed road, is it going to make it to the shoreline? We will definitely look at it as an indirect effect and potentially a cumulative effect. So it will be in there, whether it's going to be a standalone affected resource, that's to be seen at the moment, but it will be addressed, at least indirectly.
Okay, thank you.
One more in the back.
Hi, I just want to add to the comment about the noise abatement. You mentioned that you would look at how it affects residential areas, but please also look at how it's going to affect the Mastic Trail, which is important for the local people, for the heritage, and also it's an important ecotourism product for the island. And if it significantly affects people's experience on the trail, then it's going to be very important to note that.
Thank you. Yes, I'm glad you pointed that out. We are planning to look at the Mastic Trail. Actually, that's one of our locations that we'd like to do noise monitoring, is to get an understanding of what the sound levels are now, see what the sound is that comes across from Frank Sound Road, just incorporate regular noise that's going around in the background, just so we make sure that we do understand. I understand that's an important resource. We'll be looking at that.
You got Mr. Billy?
Thank you, sir. This exercise of what you wonderful people are trying to do here, what is already, some of the cracks that's already showing is typical for our island, in that we do all these different things isolated from reality. We had the master ground transportation plan thrown out through the window. We had a 1975 development plan thrown out through the window. We came up with one in 1977. Was supposed to be revised every 5 years. They did some sort of stupidness in 97. When they were getting ready to do the next one in 2001, that caused a coup to take place. After a year of planning and visits and multiple times to the districts, over 3,000 people participating because it didn't suit some developers. They caused, because they pulled in the chips, they controlled the politicians, and they pulled in the chips, and they had a coup. November the 8th, 2001. And what you're talking about here is a component of an overall plan. You're talking about population growth. I hear the wonderful things the ladies are talking. 2013, we had a method of sort of controlling population growth. But again, the chips were called in. The politicians were told you have to open up the floodgates. We have a situation. Have you seen the Pedley population study that was done on Cayman? They're probably not going to show it to you. We double our population every 10 years. How are you going to plan? You don't know where the people are going to be. So how are you going to plan for the transportation? This is total madness. But this is the way our country operates. Not rational. You're talking about what standards you should use. Well, in 1982, we had a water authority law to put in a sewage system from, well, I would say graveyard to graveyard, but along the West Bay stretch from the two boundaries north and south. That's all it is, the sewage system. The standards that were used in 1985 when they drafted the regulations were the standards that were in place back then. Sewage system standards have moved way on. We only check two things, turbidity and biological oxygen demand, which is 6 times higher than just about anywhere else in the world. It's 30 parts per million. Florida, the United States, under the Clean Water Act is 5 now. But then they check nutrients to stop all this green, slimy stuff you see on the foreshore.
Mr.
Coming. Yes, I'll give you a minute, sir.
Okay, sir.
Just give me a minute, okay?
Yes, sir.
Not too much longer.
Okay.
I'm just trying to avoid wasting money again in this country with another damn study that's going to be put in the basement. And then it's going to become another agricultural study because they lay it on the side, it gathers dust, and then they plant cassava on it. So we have our beaches. We've lost half of our beaches, or sorry, not half. 1.5 miles of the beaches about is gone because too much sewage, pathogens killing the coral, which is where we get our coral from. We have in the North Sound, because see all these places, they're going to put canals in there. After you get that road in, you see you got these roundabouts. You remember in Fiddler on the Roof, the staircase going to nowhere? These roundabouts are going to go somewhere. They're going to go off to the north into Little Sound. And then you're going to be dumping more sewage in there. You're going to kill the sand, the reefs that produce the sand for the sandbar. And then you don't have the West Bay operation. You need to take this road show, this horse and pony show, needs to go to the West Bay so the West Bay fellas that operate in the North Sound will understand that given and proceeding on the way we're going, because all our we don't have a development plan, so plans are approved by discretion, another word for corruption, and then you're going to find they're going to add, and then you're going to kill the reefs out there, and you're going to lose sand on the sandbar, and the cruise ships got nothing to come here for.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, I think quite a lot of people who live in this district feel that a new road, although desirable in some ways, is not going to solve the traffic problems in the morning, because all we're going to do is drive very slightly faster into the back of traffic building up in Savannah. So what I would like to ask, please, is what plans are there to sort out the Georgetown traffic so that we can get through Savannah? The road as it is fast until we're gone through Bodden Town. We don't have an issue with the road as such at this end, although I do appreciate in some ways that a second road would have benefits, but nevertheless, I don't see it getting us. I'd like to ask you why you think it's going to stop, how is it going to get anyone to Georgetown any faster in Russia?
Thank you very much for your question. So the NRA is currently working on areas, bottlenecks farther west as well. So around the Grand Harbor area, from the Tomlinson roundabout all the way to Bobby Thompson, et cetera. So they are currently working very diligently to come up with solutions, optimal solutions to uncork those bottlenecks, to help traffic move more smoothly, efficiently, safely. So then therefore, once the anticipated growth and once this roadway potentially comes online, you would be able to service the folks to have, on the north side and the east side, places that are anticipated to have substantial growth. They have more than one option to be able to funnel, to get through rather than funneling through one roadway. They have other alternative routes, and then they'll be able to get to their destination faster. So they are currently working to alleviate those bottlenecks farther west, so you will be able to cut down on your travel time.
And again, this is about the environmental impact assessment study of the extension of the East-West Arterial, not necessarily whether the road should be built. That's another question for another meeting, just FYI, even though I feel your pain. I truly do. Do we have a new question before? Do we have, oh, there we go.
So in the, this is more for the NRA, in our look at this entire deal, are we then saying that we're going to study the existing traffic in the corridors that we have?
Yes, we are.
And with the outlook of what we can do in reducing the number of vehicles on our road versus increasing and building more roads?
Well, the study can look at what is happening right now. The study will look at the current transit system, whether it's adequate. The study will not identify what the transit system should be. We can only identify what's there. There'll be for another arm of government to determine what they want to do. What we can look at is the current trend. We can say if we have proper transit, we're not going to develop that because it's not in our ambit. It doesn't fall under the NIA. What could happen? We also look at where growth has happened, where it has been concentrated over the last 20 years, what's happening in the last 10 years, where the growth is going to happen. Because I can tell you, nobody is going to be able to afford to buy land in South Zone.
Right, and soon no one will be able to afford to buy land out here.
Well, where are they going to go?
But that is the point, though.
Well, look,
I've argued for many years because
I've been here for a while, okay? Over the years, for the last 35 years, more growth is happening east of Selkirk Drive than it has been before.
Yes.
And it continues to accelerate, and that stretch has been pushed further out.
But I'd suggest that we have 17 dredging developments between Rackla Canals and Barkas. And I'm almost certain that not one single one of those developments are 100% built out. So why are we considering opening up more land?
I can't answer that answer. We're given a mandate to look at what would be required. Look, I'll tell you, if we do.
I guess I'm saying that this whole process may be a complete waste of time.
Is it? I mean, failure to plan is a sure way to fail.
I can't agree with you more, sir, and that's why we're in this position today.
This is part of a transportation planning study. Doing an EIA is whether we can then determine after that if it's the business case.
Okay.
You can't do the business case unless you have answers.
Right, that's fair. I argue that it's far more valuable to not touch it at all, to protect it the way it is, or wetland. It has to be more valuable to our country to protect it than to go build a road in there. The obvious reason for a road is for more development. And I would like to see the developments that we have created here already in our wetlands fully developed out prior to me actually agreeing to do more. I've studied this stuff, so let's say that I have a better understanding. Yeah. If you look at the overall impact that we've made in the last 200 years on our island, and you try to build out time for the next 100 years, how much are we going to leave for the future kids to do? Right? Like you saying pave roads. I was told as a kid, the roads were paved for me, or, right? Nothing's paved, right? And we have done a poor job of planning. And this, to me, is another poor job of planning. Because we are here, we are discussing impacting probably the most ecologically important part of our island. And it's for no more reason than for development. Because I can get to town. I am being disenfranchised by the number of vehicles and people who are allowed on my road. That's how I feel, right? So I'm not.
Let's have the director address your comments. I do appreciate it. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, sir, you make a lot of wonderful points, and so I apologize if it seems like we're being combative with you. What we're basically saying is that under our mandate is that we're trying to do the best we can in terms of improving traffic congestion and then providing alternatives for future to address future growth. And I agree with you totally. So what I would say to you is, and I'm sure everyone else agrees in here, is that we need a balanced approach to the entire solving the whole transportation problem. So I know some people will say, well, I'm a transportation expert, as you would call it. So one of the things that you would try to do is in that balanced approach, public transport is one of those, right? But then you need to look at other things. I mean, the compass, we sat down with the compass about a year ago and actually developed a lot of different strategies and asked them to put that out there so that the public would know that these are some of the things you can do. COVID taught us a lot of lessons. So even things like you notice how traffic changes when schools are out and so forth. So going forward, we can start to look at those things in terms of like hybrid learning, how we operate our schools. All these types of things will play into it, into that whole equation. Right, and that's what I'm saying is that we're not saying that this is the end all be all solution. We're saying there are other approaches to it. And what the gentleman is arguing is that we are doing what we know to do in terms of traffic congestion relief, and also a lot of the things that we said, what is the future growth? So we're looking at, someone mentioned the Pedley study that showed how we're doubling our population every so often. So, right. Yeah, that was 2008. So I remember when I first got out of school, what was it and someone said to me, oh, Cayman will never see 40,000 people, right? And here we are. And then they said, Cayman will never see 100,000 people. And we're at what, 79,000 people currently? So what we're saying is if we don't sort of foresee and plan some of these things ahead of time, we could be back here, or our grandkids could be back here saying, boy, they really didn't think about the fact that we would need roads and all that sort of stuff. So as Mr. Billy said, there were all these plans, MGTP, all these different things that were just kind of put on the shelf. Had we had the vision and the foresight to go ahead and start to do these, we wouldn't have a lot of the problems that we have today. So yeah, okay.
I just don't think there's any question whatsoever that there has been a failure in planning, whether that be for a multitude of reasons here. I'd like to just give a quick juxtaposition of perspectives, like between me and my very good friend Ted here. I actually do see a good argument for various reasons, some of which the NRA themselves have identified. The susceptibility during storm surge for our coastal roads, East End, Northside, other areas were cut off from being able to drive after the storm. If there can be a solution found that is less damaging to our central mangrove wetland system, I would be very open-minded to see that come forward. If it's possible to move the part of the road that directly impacts very sensitive areas, to try to add that to the overall equation and try as much as possible to fix that. I will say this, I think that folks need to look at the overall in one way, but look at it on a case-by-case basis. Yes, Mom, you are right. There's a choke point down by
Grand Harbor.
Hurlers Roundabout, Centra 21, whatever you want to call it, right? In my humble opinion, vociferous, the only way to deal with that is to have a way to allow for the free flow of traffic from the east in the morning and from the west in the evening. That's a vehicular overpass. However, when I look at the eastern districts, I can't, and when I'm going to my farm in the morning, I'm looking at it going the opposite direction of the majority of traffic, and then I'm coming back into the town. So I'm actually seeing it, I'm observing it all of the time. I'm passing by all of the constricted areas. I do see a need. I do see a need, and Ted might hate me for saying that, but I do see a need.
Yeah.
You know?
Thank you.
I think that there's a need to approach this in the wisest way possible. And I think that the government and elected and civil service needs to do their best and needs to listen to people. And I don't think that this meeting should have been simply the EIA part of this. This meeting was necessary to get the public's feedback and get the public's ideas and get the public's thoughts out there. And I'm very much appreciative of all y'all here. But I think we need the public to be able to discuss this in a public forum and allow the value of people's solutions to come forward and then to be weighed against each other.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. And thank you.
Good evening. Thank you to the panel. I'm here from Sustainable Cayman. There's an article out in the paper today talking about a traffic review report. I would just like to say thank you to the NRA. They've been very helpful. I've been engaging with them a lot. And I think the process we're doing here is a good thing. And basically been focusing on the terms of reference. It's important to do these things correctly and to get the feedback from the public. In regards to the terms of reference, it does detail extensively the ecosystem services provided by the Central Mangrove Wetlands. Basically rainfall, flood protection, storm protection, water filtration, fish habitat, etc. They're providing a lot of natural solutions, something that sometimes built solutions don't provide. The potential for these ecosystem services, they're also called our natural capital. So I'm just wondering if there's going to be any assessment on the loss of those services that they're providing at the moment, or whether there are mitigation effects to preserve them as a result of a road going through there, because they don't seem to be included in the cost-benefit analysis in the terms of reference. So will that be included?
So in terms of evaluating the services for the ecological, I think that comes into effect when we analyze the functional value of the ecological features as a whole. So that'll be kind of evaluated in that assessment, and that does feed into kind of the cost benefit analysis as well. When we start to consider the impacts to everything, not only cumulative and indirect and direct, but we take all of that into account when we're doing that analysis.
Follow up? Yeah. Follow up? Sorry.
In the assessment, you've determined a 1 mile radius on the road. So So I think people have talked about the fact that the roundabouts are going to bring development, so you're not actually looking at a 1 mile radius. And just wondering where the 1 mile came from.
I can answer that. That is more focused on a specific indirect effect, which is induced growth, which is where we, have typically seen in the U.S. We've done many analyses that are like this that try to understand where induced growth may happen, and that seems to be where the most specific growth does occur is, within the 1 mile of the roundabouts. We will consider the entire, from the north to the south, as Sarah's already talked about. We will look at the impacts to wetlands and the hydrological effects. But as far as like where we think may happen first, where we can most, expect first to happen is within that 1 mile. But we're interested in feedback. So if you think it should be larger than that, please let us know, or different.
Right here for John. Nope.
Oh, me? Thank you. Jay, you need me to sign up?
Whatever you want to do, sir. Whatever you feel the most comfortable with. Just no grandstanding.
Well, what do you expect?
Yeah, I know. Silly me.
Everybody else can do it, but I can't.
I'm trying.
You got a wrong evening now. Let me first, for those of you who, and there's very few that don't know me, my name is Arden McLean. Very proud of it. Now, let me first congratulate you on a very well put together term of reference. I must tell you, a draft term of reference. I have seen them before. For you who don't know, I was the minister who built it to Newlands. Hi. The lady was asking me a question a while ago, as if I had questions. I didn't want to tell you who I was, who I am. Anyway, were it not for the downturn in 2008 in the economy, we wouldn't be here, because that was going to be built. I have read, with the exception of about 20 pages, the last 20 pages of your TOR. And I was stopped because a friend of mine who's present tonight sent me another report today, an analysis of this east-west arterial that was done by Ardent out of England, consultant engineers. Now let me say that if that is what is going to be a submission to you all for consideration on your TOR, I invite you to do with it what Nancy Pelosi did with Trump's State of the Union address. My first comment after having to go home around midday to digest that all day was, the world would be a better place if closed minds came with closed mouths. That is not worth the paper it's written on. He has not even come to this country. He is proposing we destroy Bordentown. Bordentown, for his information, is the first capital of this country. And it must stay as is. This man is proposing paid parking in town. Ask him what happened to me when I proposed it in 2006. Tell him do that. And he's proposing one car per family? Really? That just tells me he has never, ever been here. He thinks, I'm in London. Let me explain to him those proposals of charging people to come into central London didn't work there. Because everybody's still paying for it. It is obvious. It is extremely obvious, patently obvious, that his instructions,
Sir,
is indicative of what he wrote.
Should we ask if they plan to use it, and then maybe we can move on to the question? I'm not trying to be funny, sir. I'm just trying to get other people a chance to speak. That's all. That's all I'm doing.
Well, I'm not funny either.
Do you plan on using that particular report?
listen.
Have you heard of that report? You have. Are you planning on using that in your reference, your terms of reference, and your maybe that's the question to ask first of all, and see where we can go from there.
So the report was actually submitted to the NRA. It wasn't submitted to us in terms of the terms of reference. So that is going to be a NRA response. If the NRA wants us to consider this in the terms, we will do that.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
You know, what I'm concerned about your report, you're so doggone independent that it might come out the wrong way, that we mightn't get our road because of all the studies that you're going to look at. That's no disrespect to you. You know, I think that's a kudos to you. And I appreciate the manner in which you did it. However, understand that we have in this country a set of people who are like akin, let me say akin to religious fanatics when it comes to the environment. 2 black mangrove swamp leaves, and they want it their way. It cannot be their way. They live in Georgetown on pumped up swampland, and then they come up here and tell us up here what we must do. Understand they have carried this on for long enough. I lost the election in 2021, John. I have no one else to butt up to. So all those who think that they can continue to use this medium to continue to marginalize the generational Caymanians, they have someone that they need to deal with now. I gotta be at their meeting. Trust me. If they have their opinion, I can have mine. And I am very capable of expressing it.
Yes, sir.
However, you think they're gonna get better tonight or what? No, they're not. Because no one understands in Georgetown, while they're on their swamped up pump land, they can get up 45 minutes before school starts and get their children ready and get to work too. After dropping their children, I go to East End every morning, religiously between 6 and 6:15. The traffic, I noticed you had a traffic study that 2019? Yeah. This morning, the traffic was past Guardhouse Hill. I live in Savannah. Okay? So you may be a little off. Trust me. So when they get up and can do that, and the people in East End and North Side have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, get their kids ready. It's either to give them breakfast in the car or they leave them on the mercy of the grandparents to get them on the bus at 6:30. 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
They're saying so now, me, they're from Northside.
Yeah.
And we talk about family. These are the same ones, these fundamentalists that talk about family life. Agreed with them 100%. They go pick up their kid at 3 o'clock, they're with them. You know what time my parents up here get with theirs? 7, 8 o'clock at night. Really? Really? And then they come on to dictate what must happen on this end of the island? On a joke, you know what? One question I got now is,
thank you.
You're very welcome. One question I got now is, why is it that there's a EIA for between Newlands and look out by Broy there? Look out. Can somebody answer that first?
Section 2. Well, is it on? Yeah. Well, because the National Conservation Act was implemented, and then the 2016, I believe, the directives for EIS became a requirement.
A requirement for what?
Well,
dig out roadway, dug out roadway. I dug under my instructions, NRA dug here a piece of that out from Newlands straight to Lookout in 2007.
correct, but it was
So what is the EIA? Just to look, see how build the road. The same proposal in this thing is what we developed when I was there in 2005. Starting in 2005. You know, honestly, it is disappointing to think that once people get Georgetown and they do what they want, they don't want anyone else to do anything. And the people on the eastern end has been marginalized for too long. And I can't say to you that this is the panacea for our traffic woes. I would not say that. But certainly it is going to help these families in these eastern districts, yet they are trying to stop it. And getting some engineer out of England that has never been here and look like he's writing a thesis for some place that you wear mud skirts and live in you wear grass skirt and live in mud huts and come and foist that on us now too? Are you all kidding? Okay, this is your country and you're entitled. You're entitled to something in it. You're entitled to a better way of life. And a better way of life is not driving on that road down there every day. And government needs to do it. Vivian is now. Vivian, does he understand, John Jay? I'm in your corner, whether we sink together, we rise together. Wherever there is no hole in your side of the boat, son, me and you in that boat together. Okay? What you say? The fundamental one of the tenets of politics is to enhance the lives of people. I coined 3 words tangibility, measurability, and visibility. It's politics in all of its manifestations. You think the people in East End worried about climate change? You think people in Northside worried about climate change? What are they gonna be worried about climate change for when their life is so hard that they don't even have money to buy and give their children trips like those in Georgetown? Ask them how many times they take trips across the pond on British Airways or other big airline to give their children vacations per year. Who contributes more to the ozone destruction than those planes? Now you send us Northsiders.
Mr. McLean, we do have others that want to ask questions. I understand. I know that you're doing a great job, and you're. I love hearing you speak all the time, sir. But we do have other people that want to ask questions. Just
well, understand I'll be to the other meeting, and I will make my continuation there. So be prepared for me. Please do.
Thank you, sir. I do appreciate your contribution. Did you want to have another question? She's got the microphone right there. And then Wendy, you're next. Oh, then we got Ezra. You're going to be just as long.
Yeah. Ezra, I'll be very quick. The Frank Sound, there's 2 arterials that are reaching there. Can you explain why there's 2? There's a why. If you put on the road, there's a why. Can you explain the second one?
Yeah, the second one, this is part of a larger plan that was gazetted under Section 26 in 2005 that would go through East End, John McLean Drive, the southern section that comes parallel in the vicinity of the high school.
Is it necessary at this point?
It's gazetted under long-term plan.
Is it necessary at this point?
It's gazetted under long-term plan. We're not building it at this point. It's not the purpose. It is not part of the EIA at this point.
So I'm just saying, there's going to be some mitigation, there's going to be some ways to say, well, does that need to happen there? Should we have 2 roads on the Y, on the Frank Sound? I know it was gazetted. Is there one that could be kept as the main one? Do we have to destroy more? Do we have to allow that?
All I can say, my instructions were, our NRA's instruction in 2005 was to provide a road all the way to East End. And currently we under this exercise is as far as Northside.
Merci, Monsieur Thibault.
Bienvenue.
And can I add just a little bit to that, where for us to consider cumulative effects, it's better to know ahead of time what's being planned for development so that we can look at everything that's going to happen. Because one of the things that we look at is if the mangrove is going to be impacted once, that's one thing. But if you have another project coming in that's going to impact the same exact area, that's a cumulative impact. Mitigation is a little more difficult. Minimization is off the charts. So it's better for us to look at everything that's being developed within that corridor or planned for development within that corridor, so we can talk about mitigation strategies, avoidance. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Deputy Speaker, excuse me. I missed you at protocol when you arrived, sir. I apologize.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I was trying to get up before Arden, as he said everything. No one had mentioned the children before, and I definitely send my children to Georgetown or Westby Road every morning. 4 o'clock we get up. You're tired, they eat breakfast in the car, just as he said. This is reality. And I keep talking about it all the time. All we want in Town is 1 more hour sleep. And we all know what 1 more hour sleep is. And Northside and East End, they meet the traffic in Bordentown. But in Bordentown, we can't get out of our roadways. So we have a real serious problem there in Bordentown. And what my question is, after doing some studies and seeing what the effects are on persons being in traffic for so long, some 2 hours, tiredness, and accident prunes, and lack of quality of life. People leave home in the morning in the dark and they come back home in the dark. The helpers are raising the children and they never see their parents. We need some help, and it's either we do an overpass or we do the East-West Arterial Road. The East-West Arterial Road from Woodland or from Hearst to Lookout could have been done a long time ago. Didn't need any EIA study for that. Went up in the helicopter, saw it. My question is why is an EIA, for the public's benefit, why is an EIA a year? And has the year started yet? That's a two-part question. And why can't there be a phased approach? Because if we had a phased approach where our main concentration right now was on trying to get to Lookout, where there's less damage to the wetlands, etc., I think that that would solve a lot of the problems and it would give us some more time to consider moving further. Although I know the minister's from Northside and he would want to get all the way up. But I need to understand, and I know, and I've heard it before, that DOE or the National Conservation Council appreciates the phased approach. So I want to understand, why aren't we trying to consider this? 1 more year, if we haven't started the year yet, waiting on an EIA is very damaging to our population. And I need to get some answers as to how. Somebody talked earlier about what are you going to do if you get a second road and go to Prospect. I can tell you what, I wouldn't even care if there's a bottleneck at Prospect, because Prospect to Georgetown is a 5-minute drive. So I want to get to Prospect. I can't get to Prospect. So if I had a second road and I could get to Prospect, that would mean that I could sleep 1 hour more, even if they didn't fix all the other connector roads. And there's a lot of simulations of what you can do, go around the airport, all kinds of different stuff. So please answer those questions in terms of the phased approach and why is an EIA a year? Thank you.
Thank you.
So as far as the the EIA requiring to take a year, it's really a matter of making sure that we can do our due diligence in both the planning and determining the mitigations for the potential roadway. We found in the past that when we proceed with an accelerated schedule for projects like this, it typically results at the end of the day in actually further delays downstream, because oftentimes you'll overlook something or you might speed past something that you then have to go back and revisit. So in the past, when I've seen projects get accelerated like this, of this magnitude, it might go from something that would be a year to maybe 36 months to do, because we tried to complete it in 6 months. And so it's just a matter of making sure that we can do our due diligence as we go through the process. But we can expedite it as much as we can.
It's a third of the area that should be a year.
So
Has the year begun, by the way? Is not. Okay, is not. Perfect. What? No. Yeah. And Mr.
The year can't start until the terms of reference are approved by the EIB. My hands are tied by the process. We'll do the process. We were told to follow the process. We will follow the process. As based on the comments we'll get, whatever they are, they'll be integrated. They'll be summarized by the EAB, see if they're okay with our answers to that, if they're relevant to the scoping opinion that we have. And then hopefully we can start the study in March.
Thank you. Final question, Mr. Miller. Thank you. It is 9 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen.
I mean, I have more than one.
Well, that's all right. Final questions. I know we're supposed to stop at 9, but obviously.
The first question is, what is the purpose of the EIA? Is the purpose of the EIA to find a reason not to build this road? Or is the purpose of the EIA to find areas that may be adverse to the environment and to come up with ways to mitigate that adversity to the environment?
The latter. The latter.
The latter. The purpose of the EIA is to identify the sensitive areas and to find ways to mitigate against it.
Well, the
I
best
don't happen to
design.
believe that no build is an option.
We actually have,
And I understand, pardon?
I was going to say, we actually have 3 primary alternatives, and Lindsay kind of touched on it. So the first one is the no build. We just don't do anything, or you don't do anything. The second one is improvements to Town Road, whether that's widening or intersection safety. And then,
Please.
also,
Can we hear the presentation, please?
If the no build option is simply to demonstrate the absolute need and necessity for this road for future development of the Eastern Districts, I will accept that you need that, do that exercise.
right. So the EIA is not going to tell you yes or no that the road has to be built or whatever, or not built. All we're going to do is provide you with the information of, if we don't do anything, this is what's going to happen possibly in the future with your population growth and, movement from people.
Okay.
And
Second,
also talk about, what if we did improvements to Town Road? What are the
that's not a
consequences to
possibility.
doing
That's not a
that? So-
possibility. That's not a possibility.
But that we still have,
The only thing more mad than that was trying to put a 3-lane highway through hot land,
but see,
which I had to stop.
so let's not get ahead of ourselves.
No, okay.
The EIA, we
I understand the purpose of
Yeah,
the
we
EIA.
don't care one way or the other about the road. What we need to tell you is the information that you need to make this decision.
That's what I would
So
like to
that's
see.
why we're looking at all the alternatives.
I also have a huge concern listening to some of the statements made tonight that you're getting a lot of misinformation. For instance, the picture you had up there about the mangrove, the beautiful picture of the red mangrove roots and stuff, was that along the gazetted road? I don't think so.
That was just an example picture for
Okay.
the presentation.
Secondly, statement was made that the Mastic Trail was developed to traverse the wetlands. I can tell you, that's an outright fabrication. The whole Mastic Trail is a fabrication of people who don't know what they're talking about. The Mastic Trail was developed to provide access for farming and economic reasons into some of the most fertile land in the Cayman Islands. When you hear these people who come here yesterday telling us that we got to protect the Mastic Reserve because it's old, rubbish. Every mahogany tree, every ironwood tree was cut down from that area in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s to build houses and churches in this district and boats. And the greatest and the most immoral confiscation of generational wealth in Northside was accomplished by the National Trust and the Mastic Reserves. They literally stole the land from the people at reduced prices. And eventually, government in the future is going to have to take it back from them because the people need a place to grow food and to eat and live. You know, I wonder what these people, some of these people understand that if the dinosaurs hadn't died, we couldn't exist. I am of the view that the road needs to be built. I am of the view that any environmental concerns can be properly addressed and mitigated. This preposterous idea again that the wetlands, you see the only place in Cayman on the other economic zones, you know, right? In Cayman, the swampland. It's only this area, this swampland that's called wetlands. All down on 7 Mile Beach, West Bay, Georgetown, it was all swamp. Could fill it in, right? But now that my grandparents stood the heat of Panama to build canals, built the bridges in the Florida Keys to get money to buy land, my father sailed the 5 oceans and the 7 seas to buy more land, and I have worked the last 50 years to buy more land to create generational wealth. Now these newcomers want to confiscate it and stop development. In my view, the road needs to be built. The National Conservation Law, when they brought that down to Parliament, I happened to be a member. I filed 32 amendments to the law to protect Caymanian farmers in eastern districts. And they accepted, I think it was 29 of them, to make the law better. That's tell you how bad the law was when they brought it there. But the National Conservation Law provides for, as part of the mitigation along this road, for any landowner where they find, your EIA finds a sensitive area, for the National Council to go into contract with these people, pay them an annual lease, and come up with a management plan for the area. It cannot be an all or nothing plan. It has to be balanced. We must be allowed to extract our generational economic ability and wealth from this land. That's why we need the road. The same way the people who are opposing it now got their generational wealth in Georgetown, 7 Mile Beach, and West Bay. Right? So my position is no build is not an option. And I would like, my recommendation would be that the EIA concentrate on identifying, the assumption should be made that the road has to be built and that the road will be built. So the EIA, I would like to see concentrated on identifying the environmentally sensitive areas and the adverse on the effect and mitigate them. There's nothing you mentioned here tonight as a possible environmental adverse impact that cannot be mitigated. If you want to go to the extreme, you can collect all, if you don't want to worry about the oils and the rubber and stuff running off the roads, you can put a drainage on the road and collect it all into a pit and treat it before it goes into the swamp, you know? Costs money. But the noise reduction, anybody who drive up I-95 in Miami, that's what those walls that you see before. It's all about noise reduction, right? So I am of the view, and I hope that I haven't read the TORs yet, but I'm hoping that if the TORs does not say this, my recommendation and my input is that the TORs should, one, make the assumption that the road has to be built and that the road is needed for economic development and prosperity in eastern districts, and the EIA must concentrate on finding ways to mitigate any adverse impacts on the environment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Just two quick questions. All right. As my good friends, Mr. Sterling Green, Ebanks, and Mr. Woody would say, we're well into overtime, but two quick questions.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate it. I just have two very quick questions about the tours. You spoke earlier about the scoping area and looking at the map. It doesn't look as though you'll actually be including these pinch points that people have spoken about regarding the traffic as it comes into Grand Harbour, because the borders at Prospect. So can you just clarify, will you be looking at the impact of an extension to the traffic in that area within the terms of reference or not?
This is about the East-West Arterial extension. Other projects that the ANRA has dealing with Grand Harbor, LPH, and all that will be presented later. It is not part of this project.
So they
The
will
scoping opinion from the EAB did not speak about Grand Harbor, LPH, downtown parking, or any of these things.
So there will be no, just to make sure that I get this right, so when I write the story, I'm not wrong. You will not be looking at the impact of building this road all the way out to Northside on the impact that will have at that pinch point at Grand Harbour. That will not form part of the terms of reference.
Well, the road is already built to the pinch point. I'm not sure what your question is. Clarify your question, please. Don't misquote me.
This is why I'm asking it. The traffic that this road will bring into Georgetown will change the current situation. It will bring the traffic quicker. It may bring more traffic, whatever. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm just asking. It will bring it to a pinch point, a funnel, as we all know, at Grand Harbour. So I just want to know if that forms that impact from the cars that will come all the way from Northside into Georgetown will be part of the terms of reference or not.
It will not be part of the terms of reference because there's already something else on their plan with what we call the Shamrock and Crew Road widening. From Chrissy Tomlinson to LPH.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
sorry, Wendy.
Thanks, Edward.
I understand your question fully, and I'm going to let Scott answer it as well. But prior to the East-West Arterial EIA and TOR and all that, we were already looking at Grand Harbor, because I think that's what you're basically saying is once we do this road, traffic's just going to come and it's going to bottleneck at Grand Harbor. So we actually do have solutions for the Grand Harbor. In fact, we're calling it we're actually doing a corridor study is what we're doing. And I'll let Scott just answer a little bit more, just expound a little bit on that. But those results are going to be made public, I would say, in the next couple of weeks. Yeah, so there is a corridor study for that includes the Grand Harbor roundabout. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that does account for the potential impacts of the East-West Arterial, and that we're making sure that we don't have negative traffic impacts due to the construction of the East-West Arterial downstream, because we wouldn't want to inadvertently create a new bottleneck by opening this roadway up. And so that is part of the evaluation that we're working on.
My second question, it relates to that a little bit, but just to make sure, does the NRA, or will it be able to give you, or will you guys find out what the percentage of commuter traffic is from Woodland Drive out to East End and Northside? So what percentage of the cars goes beyond Woodland Drive?
Yes, we can evaluate that. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention today. Please give the panelists a round of applause. Don't forget, we'll do this again Thursday nights from 7 to 9 at the Cayman Islands Baptist Church Hall at 163 Pedro Castle Road. We'll see you there on Thursday. Thank you very much.